Welcome back to my channel. My name's Tim. I am your host, and this is episode 5 of Getting into Livesteam. Now, in the last two videos, we've talked about, various aspects of clubs or not clubs, and what locomotives to buy, tools you might need, starter locomotives versus maybe not good starter locomotives. Well, this one we're going to talk about a little more generality and kind of directions. This is going to vary for a little bit for a lot of people because everybody comes in at a different place. So just sit back and relax. If you have done any of the things that we've talked about in the previous videos, buying a locomotive, invested at a club, or if you're just, kind of out on your own, like a couple of people have commented, good for you. That's awesome. And today, you're kind of in a spot where you're in a building and you open up a door, and out beyond the door is this huge expanse where there's really nothing. And that's kind of where you're at. And it's not a scary thing. Well, to a point it is, but it also creates opportunity. And for me, getting into the hobby, I was very lucky to have a club. I was very lucky to have people that could look over my shoulder and kind of, do the wave off thing. I know that's not a good idea, and some of them weren't there when I bought my 40. But anyway, one of the things I want to talk about is after you buy your initial locomotive and what to do next. And you're going to find out very quickly that when you're running the same locomotive over and over again, eventually you're going to wear it out. And you're also going to notice that a lot of people that have been around the hobby for a while have 3, 4, 10 locomotives. And it's nice to rotate them in and out. And I'm kind of in that situation now after 4.5, almost 5 years, where I have several locomotives where I can, run this one, but leave that one in the box and not upset about it. I have an open cab Shay that I bought used a couple of years ago, and it's got some miles on it. So that one we're kind of saving for special events, so to speak. I've released 2 videos recently, one before I started the series, and then one earlier today. This is Easter Sunday, about various steam ups. One was at somebody's house. The one I released earlier today was about the Baggers public steam up. And one thing that you will notice if you attend any type of steam up like that is the variety of locomotives. And there are so many choices as far as what the next locomotive is going to be. I think I've mentioned before that, my first locomotive was that big 40. My second locomotive was a Akicraft Yuki, which is a lot smaller, more like a Ruby. And we're going to see more of Yuki in an upcoming video that's going to talk about actually servicing and firing a locomotive. It's not the next video, it'll be a video after the next video. So if you start looking around and start looking online, you're going to notice the hundreds of different locomotives. And some of them are fairly inexpensive, some of them are very, very expensive. And you kind of have to look and see what you want to do and where you want to go. The other thing you're looking at is, how many scales are there? We've talked about that before. There's like 5 or 6 different scales. And that can be an interesting time in the fact that if you kind of get to be a scale elitist, like some of us can be, you're going to find yourself wanting or needing 5 or 6 different train sets and for all the different scales. So try to stick with one scale. I'm as guilty of that as anybody in the fact that I really have 3 different scales now. I have the F scale, I have the 16 millimeter now with the Superior, and I have another 16 millimeter engine that I'm going to be working on over the next 5 or 6 months to get back in service. And then I have the 2 7/8 engines. So I really don't have a 16 millimeter train yet, but I have an ore train that you've seen in some of my older videos, and I have the logging train that I've run several times more recently as I've been building it up. And as far as the 7/8 train, well, that's 8 cars, 9 cars, plus a couple of cabooses. So it's a substantial investment, substantial amount of time, because all the 7/8 equipment was a kit except for the caboose and 1 boxcar. So some of the equipment is no longer available on the 7/8. Some of it is, but won't be soon. Some of them were custom built. As far as rolling stock, pretty much everything I have is from 3 manufacturers. Most of it's from Bachmann, believe it or not. A couple of them, the disconnect cars that I showed in the video that I released earlier today, are from AMS or AccuCraft. And then the caboose that runs on the ore train normally is an old roundhouse that I put new trucks and wheel sets on. So there's some variety there, but the majority of it is Bachmann. And the nice thing about Bachmann is that it's relatively inexpensive. Now, when you buy them, normally, not always, but normally you're going to have to change out the wheel sets from the plastic wheel sets to metal. And I highly, highly recommend this when you're outside, because the track will get very hot on sunny days when you're running in either late spring or early fall, or even if you're out in the summertime, and you'll melt the wheels. And you'll find out there's a goo all the way down your track, and your wheels might be shaped a little funny and not ride so great. So put on the metal wheel sets. They'll last a lot longer. And if you run electric trains, especially if there's track power, you will really pay dividends later, because again, that plastic goo that's going to spread out all over your rails will eventually cut off the conductivity of the rails. So it's something to think about. As you progress down the line and you perhaps get a few locomotives under your belt, maybe you have some building skills. And this is something that, again, the Baggers has a huge asset of, and that is there's about 10 or 12 guys that actually scratch build locomotives. The Garrett that was in the video I released earlier is a scratch built locomotive. It's not a kit, not based on anything. And all the rolling stock of the train behind it, those are also scratch built. It's all by the same guy. His name's Bill Allen. He does have a YouTube channel, and near as I can count, he's done somewhere around 20, 30 locomotives of varying types, narrow gauge and standard gauge, depending on scales. And as you can see from the Garrett, not all of them are simple little locomotives. He's done a Climax that was, I think it's actually 3/4 inch scale, that was actually a project locomotive in Steam in the Garden. And spectacular little locomotive. You've seen it in a couple of my videos, a little diamond stack wood cab. Runs great. It does have some clearance issues on a couple of layouts that we go to, but that's for a little bit down the road. If you have a machine shop and you have fabrication skills, I would say do it. I'm not quite in the position to do it myself. I would like to, but it's something to think about. In the next video, we're going to talk about coal. Now, when I was filming yesterday for the video I released earlier, I didn't really get too much of the coal burning engines that were out in the layout. And there were two. One was a little 040 that one of the guys converted from, I believe it's an AccuCraft Emma, and he hasn't run it for a while, and he was having problems getting it to stay lit, which is sometimes an issue. It's part of the learning curve of coal. And the other one was one of our more experienced members with coal, who runs practically everything as coal except for 2 engines, and he's done most of the conversions himself, or he scratch built the locomotives. And he's probably one of the major gurus as far as coal burning within the group. And he's helped me a couple of times with my son's engine, and kind of leaning over and say, okay, put a couple more shovelfuls of coal in. Okay, hey, it works. And that's another thing I want to talk about within the Livesteam community, is the camaraderie and the mentorship, I guess you can say, from other people within the group. And they're not afraid to help out somebody that they see is struggling. They do it in a nice way. They don't do it a condescending, hey, don't do that. Try this instead. No, it's like, hey, maybe you should try this. And, I've had 2 or 3 guys at least come up to me and kind of, hey, what do I think about this? And one thing about my the Forney, when I was running it in the early days, is, I mentioned the pop valve is going off a lot. They say, turn the fire down. You're overfired. Oh, okay. Well, turn the fire down. Sure enough, less pop valve. So, there's a lot you can learn. I don't see a lot of the ego and eccentricness in the large scale hobby as much as you see in the lower scales, the smaller scales, because, we all realize what's going on. It's like, okay, forget all that. And it's one of the reasons why I enjoy doing the Livesteam as more, I think, than even the O gauge 2 rail that I used to do, O scale. And, there's a lot of guys in that club that were just really, how do you say it nicely, and they weren't friendly. And that's something that I've noticed in the live stream, that there's a lot of guys, but they're all pretty personable. Now, a couple of guys you're going to see are going to come off kind of as a little bit, oh man, he's really grumpy. And then you get to know him, it's like, oh wow, he's really a great guy, willing to share all kinds of knowledge with you. And I mentioned Bill Allen a couple minutes ago, and he's one of them. He is probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the hobby, even though he's fairly new. He's only been in the hobby like 10 years maybe. And he's doing all these wonderful things, but he's also experimenting and trying out new things, and he's sharing it with other people, which is wonderful. It'd be nice if you could just plug him into an encyclopedia type machine where you could take all the knowledge out of his head and have it organized out to where it was like, preserved forever. And there's 2 or 3 other guys like that in the baggers that, are like that. And it's kind of nice. But on the other hand, at some point, they're not going to be with us anymore. I mean, I'm in my late 50s. These guys are all 10, 20 years older than I am. So, that resource isn't going to be there. And it's been kind of true in the full-scale steam, hobby industry, that a lot of guys that were had a lot of knowledge about steam locomotives are gone. That's the way life is. And there is kind of a new wave of people coming in behind them and learning and doing. And some of them have had the opportunity to work with these older and more knowledgeable guys. I say guys, there's some girls in there too. Let's not get too carried away. But they've learned what needs to be done on these locomotives. And the same is true here in the smaller scales. I mentioned the book that I have, A Passion for Live Steam, is just amazing. And he's actually documented it. And that's now locked in forever where people can access it. And it's something to think about. Now, going back to locomotives, where do you go next? Okay, I mentioned the Yuki. I've got an open cab Shay. I've got one of the new 13-ton Shays, which are becoming extremely popular. That's a good choice. They're available. They run good. There's a lot of people that have them. So if you do run into any issues, they're all over the place. Any locomotive from Roundhouse, great choice. You cannot go wrong with Roundhouse. We talked about the 2 starter locomotives with the Sammy and the other, and they run great. But when you get into the larger locomotives, Roundhouse is a fine product. I can't disparage them in any way, shape, or form. The other one that's a major player is Regner. You can hear that one talked about a lot. And one of the locomotives in the video I posted was a Regner Shay, which hardly anybody knows about. People will see the Heislers, which are fairly new. I know of a guy that has 2 of the Regner Climaxes, and they run good. You can't say anything bad about them. They run good. And some of the other Regner locomotives are these really cool, quirky little things that were a one-off home built that was, master mechanic kind of thinking out loud at some logging or tramway and built this really interesting thing. And Regner has gone out, and that's been their whole thing, is to go find these locomotives and reproduce them in G gauge. And they usually have chain drive and rod drive and gear drive, and usually they have wibble wobble swivel cylinders, which work fine. I mean, I'm not going to disparage that. So they're really simple in that regard, but something to think about. So anyway, that's all I'm going to talk about today. Next time, as I said, we're going to discuss coal, which is a big jump from anything, and that's one thing why I stress so much in my video about the Forney, is the fact that it's a learning curve, and the Forney, as even a gas locomotive, will kind of transition you into solid fuels if that's where you want to go. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned a little bit, something to think about. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. See you later.